Hello again to all the warriors for justice out there who are righting wrongs and upholding our greatest American freedom, the right to an unfettered and unlimited trial by jury of your peers. I'm your host, Rafe Foreman, for this podcast brought to you by the original Trial Lawyers College. Hello out there in TLC land. Today we have a very special guest, Cate Beekman. Cate hails from the Napa Valley and has attended at least one TLC course, the trial skills course. Where was that? In Red Feather, Colorado, Cate?
That's right.
And Cate not only hails from the Napa Valley of California, she has been a criminal defense lawyer for well over 15 years. She was a public defender for 10, and she's been in private criminal defense for the last 5. And I just want to say welcome to you, Cate.
Thank you.
So what made you decide to pick a TLC course like Trial Skills to go to?
Honestly, I think I've heard about TLC. I don't really know where. I've just heard about it in the past. And I think I have a friend who many, many years ago was an associate of Milton Grimes's. And so she has been to multiple TLC events and has talked very favorably about them.
Okay.
And then in April of this year, I did a trial, and it had been a long time because of COVID. I think it had been close to a year and a half since I had done any trials. And it felt so great to get back into trials. And it was kind of right after that I thought, I want to do more trial work. I mean, obviously as a criminal defense attorney, you do a lot, but I wanted to sort of focus on trial skills for my, any trainings that I did.
Right.
And so it was after that trial that I looked at the upcoming seminars for TLC. And honestly, the reason I chose the foundations was because the location and the schedule worked in my schedule.
Okay.
And I did sort of, I knew I couldn't do the 3-week class in September, but I wanted something a little bit longer. So I liked that was, almost a week long.
So what did you come away with after you attended that TLC regional in Red Feather, Colorado?
Well, I'll say it was probably the best, CLE event I've ever been to.
And how so?
Well, both in terms of skills that I learned that'll help me as a lawyer, but also skills I learned that would help me as a person.
Right.
I think like a lot of people, COVID has been difficult, not being able to, see family and friends as much as we're used to.
Right.
And I had been struggling with feeling pretty disconnected for a while. And so just the connection that you develop with people through the psychodrama was kind of exactly what I needed. And so the first 2 days of our seminar was psychodrama, which for anyone who hasn't been to a TLC event is focused on, personal issues. We're not talking about cases or clients. And that was really, really beneficial for me just as a human. And I felt like moving into trial skills after doing those 2 days was, I felt both very comfortable because getting into trial skills was sort of returning to my comfort zone away from, being emotionally vulnerable as I was in psychodrama. But also I just felt very uninhibited. Like I felt so comfortable and connected with the group of people that I was willing to try new things and get up and, act out a drama from my client's case. And I think I wouldn't have been comfortable doing that had I not had that very connecting experience of psychodrama. And so it just kind of, it was just a very, I guess, like a safe space to push myself and try new things that I maybe otherwise wouldn't have tried. And I just realized just how valuable and how effective the psychodramic techniques are in trial and in telling your client's story.
And what was it that made you connect in the psychodrama rather than lighting your hair on fire and running out of the building?
Well, I mean, when I didn't really honestly know much about psychodrama at all when I got to Colorado.
Right.
But I knew that it was going to be sort of a new experience, and I was going to, I was kind of committed in myself to just going with it and, just being uncomfortable if it made me uncomfortable and just trying to grow as a person. But I think what was sort of, I guess, what caused me to feel connected with people is just the experience of, just being vulnerable and emotionally open with people and sharing feelings and perspectives in a very non-judgmental space.
Do you feel like it changed your perception of the other students? I'm going to call them students, but the other lawyers that were at the seminar because you went through this psychodramatic experience with them?
Definitely.
And how did it change your perception for better or for worse?
Oh, definitely for better. I mean, so for anyone who hasn't been through psychodrama, basically there's a protagonist who acts out a drama, and the rest of the participants play roles in that drama. But we also, even if we're not playing a role, you sort of participate by something that's called doubling. And then at the end of the drama, everyone shares. And one of the things I realized through the sharing is how I really connected with everybody, even if the drama or the experience was something very foreign to me or something that I've never experienced. Through that process, you realize that there's really connection in every experience. And so I didn't know the people prior to going through the psychodrama, but so I guess in that sense, it changed my perspective because I got to know people really well. Right. But I also got to know them in this environment of just really non-judgmental, open-minded, just human connection.
Now, there's a couple of questions I want to ask you,
sure.
But sharing, you mentioned that, and that's such an important part of the connection in the psychodrama. How do you believe that a jury can share with us as counsel representing the wrongfully accused?
Well,
how does the jury participate in sharing?
By acquitting my clients.
That's right, by their verdict.
I mean, they can't talk to us, so the sharing happens in their heads. And we just have to trust that, if we're presenting it the right way, that they're going to connect with the story.
They can only talk to us in voir dire, which is why voir dire is so important, because that's where we start forming the ability to see how people analyze and relate to an issue.
That's right. And that's the one trial skills class I had with you, Ray.
Well, I'm sorry you didn't have a better instructor. We'll try to do better next time. But sharing is such a really important thing that I want to call this out, because this was your first experience with TLC and psychodrama, correct?
Correct.
What in the world would make you feel permission and safety? I've heard you say non-judgmental about 3 times, and I love that, because we have to create a safe environment, free of judgment, free of criticism, free of manipulation. But what was it that gave you permission to share your personal truth with this person who just completed their psychodrama?
It's the I show you mine, you show me yours. I think that's sort of how you put it in voir dire, but I think that's exactly right. Because the people, for example, if I'm sharing with someone in psychodrama, the protagonist has just shared so much that
Right.
I feel completely comfortable sharing with them.
Exactly right. And can you see how that translates into a trial? And whether or not you feel good or bad about the verdict that we just received in Minnesota. I'm not trying to analyze the verdict. What I'm trying to do is to tell the listening public that those 12 jurors connected with the defendant.
Oh, are you talking about Rittenhouse?
I am.
Okay.
Now, I personally thought that his crying and, snot bubbles blowing out his nose was one of the fakest things that I'd ever seen. But I wasn't on the jury. And the jury, I mean, you can say whatever you want to about that case. And I have my own feelings about it. But what I'm trying to analyze is the jury connected with the defendant in that case.
As a human being.
As a human being first.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those who can't understand that verdict and who doubt the validity of that verdict and who want to criticize that verdict, let's just step back and take off our criticism for a minute and ask ourselves, who did the jury connect with and why? And obviously, we all know it was the defendant. Wonder what about it allowed them to connect with him in such a powerful way?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I watched about 10 minutes of his testimony. So I don't really know with respect to that case, but I do know that as I've been practicing, I would say more recently in my career, I put my clients on the stand as much as I can. Anytime I can, I do.
Right.
Because I think, obviously defendants have the right not to testify in their cases where they can't. But I do think the human connection to the defendant is everything. And the jury sees them not just on the stands, but, they, especially in longer trials, they're watching the defendant the whole time, and they see them interact with their lawyers. There's so much they see with the defendant, but I think it's really important whenever they can testify that they have that opportunity. The jurors have the opportunity to hear from the defendant.
I agree. If you talk, you walk. If you sit, you stay. And the bottom line for that is, unfortunately, I have clients who have such a long history that if I put them on the stand, the jury gets to know about that.
Right.
And so that obviously weighs against my ability to put them on the stand. But as you experienced psychodrama, you obviously have told us why you shared and what allowed you the permission to share. But I'd like to see how you were affected when you played a role in someone else's drama. Did you get to play a major auxiliary or a role in someone else's reenactment?
I played some. I don't know that I played a major role. I did play some. I played roles in a couple of dramas. Yes.
And how was that experience for you?
I do think it because I was in the drama and acting it out, I think I sort of felt more what whatever role I was playing, what that person would have felt. So rather than observing, I was more sitting in the seat of that person.
Yeah, you authentically reversed roles. Right.
And I actually did that in one of the sessions, the trial skills sessions. I think it was direct. I think it was a direct examination session. I played one of the clients for a civil attorney, and she had been in a car accident, and I was the plaintiff, and I was sitting in like a recreated car scene and, testifying in the back seat of a car.
Right.
And it was amazing. That to me was really, really significant because I actually felt like I was sitting in the back of this car when I obviously was not the plaintiff and had never been in that experience, but I could see how effective it would be to put that in front of a jury, because even just pretending I was her was really significant for me.
I actually heard about that session from in our faculty meeting. Somebody reported about how authentically you played that role.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to do for our listeners is I want to drill down on what it was that allowed you to play that role. You'd never heard anything about the case except what you heard in that session, right?
That's right.
So how did you have such a deep connection that you could play that role so authentically?
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember what I had heard about what the attorney had told us about the case and the way he had done it. Because I think that I had been in the session where he did opening with the same case.
Right.
And so he had done the opening using some of the, the TLC techniques. And so I was familiar with the story by the time I played that role. So I think that probably had something to do with kind of how I was able to connect with her experience, even though I had just learned about it that day.
Well, but while you were in the role, I think you said it strengthened your understanding or empathy or connection. I don't know which word you used, but that it enhanced your connection to the story. Is that accurate?
Yes, definitely.
And so what I want our listeners to understand is I hear a lot of people say, well, we can't do that in my jurisdiction because it's a golden rule violation. No, it's a golden rule violation for you to look at the jury and say, put yourself in the place of my client. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do is authentically set the scene, and the jury will naturally be in the scene in their mind. Yes, they're sitting in the box, but they see themselves as sitting in the back seat if you do a good enough job of setting the scene. And so tell us about your perspective of testifying from the back seat,
right,
the role of the car versus just sitting on the witness stand.
Yeah, no, you're right. Just setting the scene itself changed the way I saw it in my mind. Literally, the attorney put 4 chairs set up as if it was a car, and I sat in the passenger seat behind where the driver would have been. And even just sitting there, and then I think at one point, like, I leaned my head against where the window would be because that's what happened in the story.
Right.
And just being in that scene just made it kind of come alive in my mind.
Are you open to the possibility that the 12 people, the jury who were watching you be in that role in that scene, it opened up a pathway of connection for them because they could see themselves in that scene, even though you didn't ask them to put themselves in that role? For
sure. Absolutely. And that reminds me of another case from, I think, that same session where the lawyer, it was another civil case, and the plaintiff was an elderly woman. And obviously the lawyer wouldn't ask an elderly woman to lie on the ground and reenact something. And so the attorney did it. He laid on the ground while he was questioning his client. And he did that during opening. And I played his client in direct. So during opening, I was part of the jury. I was watching. And yes, just seeing him on the ground while he spoke took me to the scene for sure in my mind. It definitely made me connect a lot more than if he'd been standing, facing us, talking at us.
Right. I like to say if you invest yourself in the energy of the telling of the story, In other words, if you will completely give yourself and your energy into the telling of the story, then I will completely give myself into the listening to your story.
That makes a lot of sense.
And unfortunately, what we see lawyers doing is standing behind a wooden box and just vomiting words.
Yeah, and turning off the lights and putting a bunch of small print on the screen and reading it.
Exactly.
It's so ineffective.
Isn't it, though?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we think about connection with people in the human condition, human beings don't like to sit and be lectured to.
Right.
But human beings very much like to see what happened, like to see what's going on, like to try to figure out what is this case about or what does this mystery involve. And so scene setting is not only one of the most effective tools that we have, it is perhaps the most effective tool at inclusion, because everybody that's watching the same scene has the same opportunity to go there in their own mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I haven't been able to use scene setting yet. I haven't done a trial since Colorado. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Do you get to do depositions in California in criminal cases?
No.
See, we don't either in Texas, but in Missouri, you get to take depositions in criminal cases. And when I was up there, the greatest place for you to practice scene setting is in a hearing, a motion to suppress, a deposition, where all the bananas are not on the table. In other words, your whole case is not riding on this hearing. And I encourage our listeners to, in civil cases especially, to use role reversal in scene setting in your depositions and hearings. And in the criminal arena, we may only get the opportunity to do it at a motion to suppress hearing, but, let's do it.
Yeah, I could see that working at a preliminary hearing too. That's a great idea.
Yeah. And I do a lot of DWI work in Texas. We have a state office of administrative hearings, which suspends your driver's license when you get a DWI, and you have that hearing rather quickly compared to the criminal system. And so what a great place to utilize scene setting and role reversal.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Although our DMV hearings are entirely by phone now, which is horrible.
Yeah.
But that's a great idea once we get back to in person.
You can still set the scene by phone, but it's not as effective.
So you just have the witness describe the scene.
Yeah. Because the human condition, we don't connect necessarily to the words. We connect to the emotional context that's carrying the meaning of the words. And you don't have to tell the people the emotional context if you set the scene. Like, for example, you leaning your head on the glass in that car said everything. Not only did it say you're committed to the role, you want to accurately portray the role, but it also was important because of the outcome of the case and what happened. And watching you do that naturally may be way more effective than telling the jury that she leaned her head on the glass.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, it's amazing that the tools are they're kind of like natural storytelling tools.
Exactly. That's exactly what they are.
But we get so far away from that when we're lawyers. When you, especially young lawyers, you're used to using legalese and, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all these phrases that take you away from, I think, what we should be aiming for, which is sort of non-lawyerly storytelling.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, TLC was really great for me to learn those techniques because when I first started, I learned from obviously lawyers around me. I did a lot of reading. I went to seminars, and I came to the conclusion that, you win by telling your story. And I always try to tell the story as many times as I can, in opening, with every witness if I can. I try to repeat the story as much as I can.
Right.
But I never have had really any training on how to effectively tell the story. So I think that's what is so valuable about the TLC techniques, because they take you away from those lawyer habits and take you back to the humanity of the story.
Well, since you mentioned it, let's do a little role training of each other on how to tell a story. What do you think is the most important element of storytelling? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you are.
Sorry about that.
What is the most important aspect of storytelling? I mean, I think the most important thing that you want to convey is the emotion.
I agree. And I put you on the spot without giving you there is probably, this is just a subjective thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I think is the most important part of storytelling. And of course, getting the emotion out is number one.
But
how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to posit that character development is one of the most important aspects of storytelling, because once I know who the villain is, I know who did the bad thing and needs correcting.
Mm-hmm.
Once I know who the victim is, I know who suffered the consequence
Mm-hmm.
at the hands of another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to encourage people to think about storytelling and scene setting and role reversal in terms of character development.
Mm-hmm.
Give me the traits. And the reason that I bring this up is because character evidence is so powerful, there's rules against using it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have rules against hearsay and exceptions to it, but we have rules strictly enforced about character.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because it's so damned effective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once you find out my client took some cocaine, you don't even care about the rest of the story. You just think he's guilty.
Right.
Right?
Or
that he took cocaine in the past.
You're making me think of another trial that I did a few years ago. And what you're talking about just perfectly explains the whole trial and the verdict. And it was a domestic violence felony case, and my client was married to this woman, and they were sort of in the process of divorcing. It was the relationship was falling apart, but the story was what happened on Christmas Day. And
right.
Basically the woman had taken the kids and left my client home alone on Christmas after, having a big argument with him, and just sort of abandoned him at home. And my client testified, and he ended up, he had to sort of admit to some conduct, but the conduct he admitted to was a misdemeanor. But we definitely sort of developed that the woman was a villain in the way she was treating him.
Right.
And I think the jurors, at the end, the jurors waited for us and told us we didn't want to convict him of the misdemeanor, but he admitted it. We had to. And they were out in the hallway hugging him, feeling sorry for him. And it's exactly what you're talking about, because we had shown them who the villain was, and who they could connect with emotionally, which was my client. And of course, the prosecutor didn't want to tell any of that. They wanted to focus on, the 2 minutes in the bathroom that they alleged was this felony conduct.
Well, and that's exactly how we explain the written hour verdict. How else can you explain carrying an automatic AR-15 in the streets of a neighboring town and shooting and killing 2 people and being acquitted?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe let's talk about some character development. 18-year-old kid.
Lifeguard.
What'd you say?
I said lifeguard.
I didn't know about the lifeguard, but okay, he's a lifeguard.
Yeah.
He's following the law as he understands it to be.
And he's there to help people.
And he's there to help people.
Mm-hmm.
That story resonated and connected with 12 people. And the prosecutor's desire to focus on, like you said, the 2 minutes of felonious, probably in this case, it was 60 seconds
Mm-hmm.
of felonious conduct. And the defense must have done a good job of identifying who the villain was. And I didn't hear the whole trial, so I don't know who they identified as the villain, but one that comes to my mind is the law. If you're going to pass a law that you have a right to carry a firearm and you have a right to self-defense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and the other thing that I think I saw a little bit of was the prosecution's attempt to get character evidence in against Rittenhouse.
Yeah, and you saw how badly that affected the judge.
Yep.
Because they showed that on every news channel.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they're trying to do that is because character evidence is so damned effective.
That's right.
I've said that twice now, and I hope people get it. That's why I want you to focus on the reason that the rules say that you cannot use character evidence is because you're trying to show that they're acting in conformity with prior actions,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that must be our natural human instinct that people act consistently with their character.
Yeah, definitely.
Therefore, if you want to win, you have to do character development very carefully and very skillfully as a part of your storytelling arsenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on both sides, as much as you can.
On both sides, but let's not have the prosecution.
Well, no, I meant you develop the villain as well as the hero of your story.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I appreciate you mentioning that. The hero in every jury trial is the jury, not the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
Because the hero is the one that can fix the wrong, and the only people in the room that can fix and right a wrong or resolve this conflict is the 12 on the jury.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to think about hero-centric story structure and decide and really resolve that the jury is the hero and quit trying to make our client out as the hero.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me, I've argued in the past to juries, when I feel like I have a really strong argument that this was a horrible miscarriage of justice.
Yeah.
I've argued in closing that the jury, they are the ones with the power to stop this.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Calling them the hero. I like that.
So, Cate.
Yes.
What do you have to say to the new listener who's listening to this going, I don't really understand what they're talking about? Why would I need to go to a TLC event?
Well, certainly if you don't understand, you need to go, because I do think it's a really hard thing to explain. Maybe it's not hard to explain, but you definitely don't get the same value as actually experiencing it. But, I'll just say when I first got to Colorado, there were a lot of newer attorneys. There was a good mix, but there were a lot of newer attorneys. And at times I felt like, I wish I had come to something like this when I was a newer attorney. But then at the same time, I felt like because I'm comfortable in the courtroom and I sort of have, I do what I do in front of a jury, and I'm comfortable with certain things that I do. I felt like the techniques that I learned really just helped me both kind of name what it is I'm trying to do and kind of do it more deliberately, but then also incorporate these storytelling techniques so that I can do it more effectively.
Will you come back to another TLC program?
Oh, definitely. Yes. No question, I will.
What you don't know is you have a potential juror sitting here listening Tim has been subpoenaed or sequestered or summoned, and he's going to serve on jury duty coming up next week after Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And as a highly skilled criminal defense lawyer, what would you say to Tim going into his first jury experience?
I would say he shouldn't try to avoid it.
Yeah.
It's really important that people who have open minds and, are not, I'll say it again, Rafe, are not coming in with a judgment, sit on juries.
Right.
I often hear, most of the time when I hear people get a jury summons, they're asking me how to get out of it.
Which is what Tim was doing originally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful experience. I've never done it. I shouldn't say it's a wonderful experience, but I do have one friend in particular who loves jury duty. But it's so important that, that people spend their time doing that and actually invest in it and, take it seriously and commit to the time that it's going to take.
Yeah, I've come to peace with my time commitment.
Yeah, he's changed his mind. He's actually committed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just think how you would feel if you were wrongfully accused sitting in the criminal defendant's chair. All you want is a fair jury.
It's true.
Well, thank you, Cate.
Thank you,
for
Ray.
your time today. I want to mention to the listeners out there that we have a TLC regional coming up in Mo Ranch. That's down in Texas in January. So if you're just itching to get back together, you just can't wait to try on your trial skills, and you need to beat the COVID pandemic isolation, think about signing up for Mo Ranch. And Cate, it's been our pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Thank you, Rafe. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. We did too. Thanks again for listening. To sign up for these TLC events, go to www.triallawyerscollege.com and select Register for a Course at the top of the menu page. For more episodes of the original Trial Lawyers College podcast, subscribe to us on Apple Podcast or wherever you already consume podcasts. Do you have a topic of discussion that you would like to hear more about? Or are you interested in volunteering to be a guest on the original Trial Lawyers College podcast? If so, please email me at warriorforjustice@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. Good verdicts to all.